A night so still that even the stars seemed to hold their breath, and in that stillness a single word tore the veil of silence. Read. Not from a human tongue, not from the pages of any library, but a command carried across the unseen by the angel Jibril to a heart prepared by solitude and sincerity. In the cave of Hira, where a man had climbed away from the noise of markets and the cruelty of custom to search for what was pure, the first spark of guidance touched earth. The mountain cradled a secret that would soon cradle the world, and the air itself seemed to tremble with the weight of a mercy about to unfold. From which country are you watching this video? Subscribe to this channel if you love Islam. What began as a single command was the opening of a door, the breaking of a dam through which revelation would flow, not as entertainment or poetry, but as the living speech of the one who made dawn and dust and the hidden turns of the human heart. It began in Ramadan, a month chosen to refine the body so the soul can listen, because a fasting heart is a quieter room where truth can sit. The first verses did not arrive like a heavy book dropped onto a table. They descended like rain at perfect intervals, soaking the earth of Mecca, then Medina, then the centuries after, meeting people exactly where they stood, some with pride that needed softening, some with pain that needed salve, some with questions that needed a lantern. Imagine the shock of hearing words that felt both utterly new and intimately familiar, like remembering something you were born knowing but somehow forgot. That is why the Quran calls itself a reminder. It doesn't invent the soul, it awakens it. And from the very first beat, those words identified themselves: guidance for those who want to be guided, a clear proof for those who prefer light over shadow, a criterion that cuts through the fog of opinion to show where mercy stands and where harm hides. The revelation did not flatter power or echo the fashion of the day. It lifted the poor, defended the orphan, honored the truthful, and reminded the strong that strength without justice is merely a costume for fear. The message reached a people skilled in eloquence, people who worshipped words, and yet these words disarmed them. The most gifted poets dropped their pride because they recognized a rhythm no poet could forge and a depth no sage could summon. Even the silence between verses seemed purposeful, like the pause between heartbeats that keeps you alive. Revelation taught that reading is not a hobby. It is worship when you read what heals you, and a covenant when you carry it into action, the kind of reading that turns a person into a lighthouse for others. The first spark spread from a cave to a city, from a city to a civilization, and from a civilization to your screen tonight, so that in your own quiet, even if it is only a small corner of a noisy house, you can sense that same invitation. Read with your eyes, yes, but read with your conscience, read with your intention, read until the meaning rearranges the furniture of your life. That is how chapter 1 of our faith's greatest story began, with a command that became a path that became a people, and a people who kept walking by the light of words that will never dim. If you have ever felt lost, let that first word be your compass. If you have ever felt unseen, let that first night be your proof that the unseen sees you. The same Lord who sent a message to a cave on a mountain is able to send clarity to your heart where you sit now, if only you open the page and step into the story that has been waiting for you since the first read. Long before leather-bound mushafs rested on wooden stands, and long before printing presses kissed ink to paper, the Quran lived on the tongues and in the hearts of those who loved it. The earliest believers did not simply store verses in memory as a collector stores coins. They repeated them until each word braided itself with their breath, until prayer and recitation felt like a single act of living. You can picture the scene: a small circle under the Meccan sky, torches flickering, someone reciting slowly, while others close their eyes to hear the shape of letters and the way meanings turn like birds in flight. Memory was devotion, and writing was stewardship. Parchment, palm leaf stalks, shoulder blades of animals, anything that could receive a line became honored, not because of the material, but because of the trust it carried. The prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, would review the revelation with Jibril every Ramadan, setting a rhythm that still echoes in our masajid when the nights grow long and the pages grow light in our hands. That review was not a mere recital. It was a renewing, a tightening of the knot, a way of saying to the community, this is how a book becomes a life. And the community responded by building a fortress with two walls, one wall of ink, one wall of memory, so that even if wind scattered papers, the verses would remain in hearts. Even if grief fell heavy on hearts, the ink would hold steady on pages. Arabic itself seemed designed for safekeeping, roots branching into families of meaning that help recall not just the sound of a word, but its entire neighborhood of ideas. Patterns that sing when recited correctly and snag the ear when recited wrongly, pulling you back to precision like a friend who refuses to let you slip. Tajwid was born from reverence. Give every letter its right, every elongation its due, every stop its mercy, because the way you treat the word is the way you treat the one who spoke it. Over time, the modes of recitation, qira'at, were carried person to person with the rigor of a trust that cannot be diluted. Chains of teachers link us to those first nights, so that when you learn, you are not just copying sounds, you are joining a family whose oldest elder is the Prophet himself. Think about what that means for you. When you mouth Al-Fatiha in your prayer, your voice enters a river that has been flowing unbroken for more than 14 centuries. You are not standing alone. You are standing in a current that has delivered hope to caravans, palaces, prisons, and bedrooms alike. The discipline of dividing the Quran into juz, hizb, and ruku came later as a kindness to busy lives, but the heart of the practice never changed: consistent, gentle companionship. Little but regular is the secret. 1 page a day that you treat with respect will do more for your soul than a sprint that leaves you breathless and empty. That is why so many who truly love the Quran build simple routines, recite before dawn to plant calm into the coming hours, review after Maghrib to harvest what the day tried to steal. Teach a child 1 verse and watch your own understanding mature in the mirror of their questions. The more you carry, the easier it becomes to carry. The more you forget, the easier it becomes to forget. So guard your portion the way a gardener guards the first green shoot in spring. Even the act of writing your own notes on meanings, tracing a word's root, or copying a verse by hand can change how it lives in you. The hand learns, the eye learns, the tongue learns, and then, by God's permission, the heart begins to teach the rest of you how to live. And when a verse lands, you will know. It lands the way rain lands on dry soil, not with fireworks, but with the quiet promise that something living is about to push through. That is the companionship promised by this book. Not a thrill that fades, but a steadiness that stays water for the long road, light for the late hour, a song you never tire of because it keeps revealing new harmonies every time you listen with care. So let the tradition of hearts and ink become your tradition tonight. Choose a small portion, give it your best sound, guard it tomorrow, and watch, slowly and surely, as the words you carry begin to carry you. The Quran opens like a door that keeps revealing rooms within rooms, and the first key is understanding its shape. 114 surahs stand like constellations across the sky of the Mushaf, some bright and vast, others small and concentrated, each carrying a climate of meaning you can feel the moment you step in. Al-Fatiha is the entryway prayer that every believer recites multiple times a day, a short passage that holds the architecture of worship itself: praise, servanthood, request for guidance, and the map of the straight path. It is not simply an opening, it is a mirror held up to the soul, asking whether it truly wants what it says it wants when it whispers, "Guide us." From there, the longest surah, Al-Baqarah, stretches like fertile land after rain, laying down principles for belief, law, ethics, and community, sheltering the throne verse that proclaims God's living knowledge and tireless guardianship, and concluding with 2 verses that pour ease and covenant into hearts that carry. In contrast, Al-Kawthar is like a single sip that satisfies 3 short verses, promising an abundance only God measures, teaching gratitude and sacrifice, and reminding the faithful that false disparagement evaporates while divine favor remains. The Quran's chapters are not ordered by size alone, yet the arrangement carries wisdom, long fields where the believer walks at a thoughtful pace, and small gardens that deliver the fragrance of meaning in a handful of words. Each surah contains ayat signs because every verse points beyond itself the way a lighthouse points to safe waters. They are not merely sentences but signs stitched into the fabric of speech. The Basmala, in the name of Allah, the most merciful, the especially merciful, stands at the threshold of nearly every surah, like a banner of gentleness that frames truth, so it lands softly even when it is firm. Only At-Tawbah begins without that banner, reminding us that sometimes a warning must stand stark so that its moral weight cannot be wrapped in misunderstanding. Some surahs open with mysterious, disjointed letters, Alif Lam Mim, Ha Mim, Yasin, sounds that invite humility before meaning, like knocking on a door whose handle belongs to the knower of the unseen, a signal that the human intellect is honored but not sovereign. There are verses that ask the forehead to fall in prostration, sajda tilawa, because comprehension is not complete until the body participates in reverence. Understanding is not only something you think, it is something you enact. The Quran organizes itself also by journeys of practice. 30 juz for a month of companionship, sections and ruku markers to guide breath and reflection in prayer, and thematic currents that flow across chapters so that patience learned in one place is tested in another, and gratitude sung in one surah is lived in the next. Stories are placed not as entertainment, but as ethical instruments. The narrative of Adam and Iblis appears in more than one surah because the struggle between humility and arrogance is not a single lesson, but a lifelong curriculum. The arrangement allows the believer to meet a specific need on a specific day, comfort for grief in Maryam, arguments against despair in Az-Zumar, a charter of mercy and justice in An-Nisa, a reminder of consequences and accountability in Al-Mulk, and a renewal of awe in Ar-Rahman, where blessing after blessing is counted until denial feels unreasonable. Even the soundscapes of the surahs seem tailored, soft repetitions that steady the heart, abrupt images that wake it, gentle promises that sow hope, and precise laws that draw the lines that protect dignity. The throne verse anchors fear by telling the mind exactly who holds the heavens and the earth without fatigue. The light verse sketches the parable of guidance as a lamp within glass, clarifying that faith is not a fog, but an illumination that grows brighter with purity. The longest verse in the book, about contracts and trust, establishes that spirituality without honesty in daily dealings is a shadow without a body. Words must become responsibility. And across the pages, the Quran keeps calling to the same center: pure monotheism, compassion carved into habit, justice braided with humility, so that regardless of where you open, you find your way back to the One. This structure is not random, it is a pedagogy. Long surahs cultivate stamina and breadth, short surahs sharpen focus, and together they alternate like day and night, each length teaching a different discipline of attention. The book trains you to move between grand principle and intimate conscience, between the governance of a community and the whisper of a single heart at dawn. When you begin to read with that awareness, surahs stop being long or short and become precise doses, each one measured to heal a particular wound or grow a particular strength, which is why a child may be steadied by Al-Ikhlas, while a merchant is corrected by the verse on weighing fairly, and a leader is guided by the story of Dhul Qarnayn's service. The book's inner design even guides memory itself. Themes recur with variation so that memorization is reinforced by meaning, justice, gratitude, patience, truthfulness, modesty, reliance, repentance, each theme a thread that reappears to stitch a tighter fabric of character. 2. Understand the Quran's structure is to realize that you were never meant to sprint through it once and stop. You were meant to circle back, to spiral deeper, to find that the same surah you recited last year now speaks to a different season of your life, because your heart has new weather. In that way, the Quran is not a bookshelf of separate documents, but a living city of meaning where avenues intersect, courtyards open to the sky, and every return reveals a neighbor you had not noticed. Let its surahs be your streets and its ayat your lamps, and your nights will not be dark again. Understanding where a verse first touched earth changes how it touches you. The revelations that descended in Mecca spoke primarily to a people defined by lineage, trade, and pride in eloquence, inviting them to the unseen with arguments from creation, appeals to conscience, and stories that shook the sleep of idolatry. These Meccan verses carry the electricity of first contact, bold declarations of God's oneness, portraits of the day of judgment that make the heart straighten its posture, oaths by the dawn and the night, and the galloping chargers that turn the natural world into a classroom. You feel in them the call to break chains that are inside, before changing chains that are outside, chains of prejudice, greed, arrogance, and despair. They come in surahs that are often shorter, sharper, and rhythmically intense, striking the ear so that the message cannot slide past unnoticed. They teach the oppressed to be patient without surrendering dignity, and the powerful to bow before justice. Meccan revelation chisels Tawhid into the heart's stone and plants certainty about accountability after death, because without these roots, no ethical tree can stand when the wind rises. In contrast, the Medinan verses arrive in a city where revelation must now build public life. They bring law wrapped in mercy, rules for family, trade, inheritance, justice, war, and peace. The protection of the vulnerable, because belief that does not repair the world is a sentiment, not a surrender. The tone expands, the canvas widens, and community becomes a vessel for compassion, with treaties to honor, hypocrites to unmask, and neighbors of different faiths to live alongside with fairness. Medinan revelation does not replace Meccan truth. It demonstrates it, pouring Tawhid into the concrete of courts and markets, carving the Prophet's character into policy. Knowing the difference between Meccan and Medinan is like knowing whether you are planting seeds or building rooms. Both are necessary, but the tools and movements change. When a verse speaks of patience under mockery and torture, you hear the gravel of Meccan streets under the feet of early believers. When a verse details contracts or cautions against consuming usury, you hear the bustle of Medinan stalls and the hum of a society being taught to be gentle with the weak. Even within a single surah, the flavor can blend, because life is not cleanly segmented, yet the dominant notes guide you. Meccan surahs like Al-An'am, Al-Araf, Yunus, Hud, Yusuf, Arad, Ibrahim, Al-Hijr, and An-Nahl dwell at length on prophecy, creation, and conscience, arguing for truth with a persistence that frees the soul from its idols, while Medinan surahs such as Al-Baqarah, Al-Imran, An-Nisa, Al-Ma'idah, Al-Anfal, At-Tawbah, An-Nur, Al-Ahzab, Al-Hujurat, Al-Mujadila, Al-Hashr, and Al-Mumtahana shape the duties and delicacies of living together under God. The shift from Mecca to Medina is also the shift from being a small light in the corner to lighting a whole city. Persecution recedes, responsibility increases, and the ethic of mercy becomes visible in governance. In Mecca, believers learned that power belongs to God. In Medina, they learned how power must behave when it is entrusted to humans. Meccan verses console the broken, challenge the arrogant, and awaken sleepers. Medinan verses refine the grateful, discipline the rash, and protect the fragile. When these layers meet in a life, a believer can bow under insult without breaking, can speak truth without cruelty, can hold authority without forgetting the orphan's bread. Consider how this helps you read. If you're facing temptation to bend your principles for approval, a Meccan passage may steady your spine. If you're mediating a conflict at home or at work, a Medinan passage on fairness or backbiting or reconciliation may guide your hands. If you are building a project that affects others, Medinan discussions about trust and contracts remind you that transparency is worship. And if your heart simply needs to remember what it is, Meccan reminders about the one who split the seed and the date stone, who brings rain to dead earth, who counts each step and tear, will return you to center. The prophetic biography itself explains the need for both currents. 13 years of Meccan formation carved sincerity and resilience into the early community, so that 10 years in Medina could convert belief into a civilization of mercy, without arrogance. Mecca taught how to lose in the world without losing your soul. Medina taught how to win in the world without losing your soul. Across both phases, the Quran addresses the same human being, the one who doubts, hopes, loves, fears, forgets, and remembers, guiding them first to stand upright within, then to walk upright without. So when you open the book, ask yourself gently, is my struggle today Meccan or Medinan? Do I need to be convinced again that God is greater than my fear, or do I need to implement what I already know with integrity and care? Read accordingly, and you will find that every page knows your season, because the one who spoke it knows you. Every beautiful name that the Quran carries is not merely a title, but a doorway into how it wants to live inside you. When it calls itself Al-Furqan, the criterion, it is telling you that confusion is not your destiny, because there exists a light that slices through fog and shows you where mercy stands and where harm hides. When it is Ad-Dikr, the reminder, it whispers that you were born with a memory of your Lord and that forgetfulness is a temporary cloud, not your sky. As Al-Huda guidance, it does more than point to a path. It keeps company with your steps, pausing when you pause, urging when you hesitate, steadying you when the ground beneath choices becomes slippery. As Ash-Shifa, healing, it meets wounds you have words for and wounds you don't, binding a conscience frayed by regret, cooling a mind overheated by fear, and mending relationships with verses that teach patience, justice, apology, and return. As Kitabun Aziz, an unassailable book, it stands beyond the reach of corruption, guarded in hearts, guarded in script, guarded by a promise that no falsehood draws near from before it or behind it. It is also An-Nur, light, because it does for the soul what morning does for the horizon, a slow unveiling that makes familiar shapes visible and new possibilities imaginable. It is Al-Bayan, clear explanation, because it does not bury truth in riddles. It explains, reasons, argues, and persuades, inviting the listener to agree freely rather than submit confusedly. It is Al-Mubin, manifest, because it reveals, not conceals. And when you bring to it an honest question, it returns an honest answer, even if that answer asks you to change. It is Al-Hakim, perfectly wise, so that each instruction carries the balance of justice and mercy, the timing of a skilled physician who knows when to soothe and when to stitch. It is Al-Majid glorious, so that awe is not an accident of eloquence, but the natural human reaction to hearing creation and conscience summoned as witnesses by the one who made them both. It is at Tanzil, that which was sent down, so your heart can trust that guidance is not a human invention, climbing up to God, but a gift descending from God to humanity. It is Al-Bushra, good news, because even its warnings are lights along a road, and its promises are provisions for travelers who are tired of walking in circles. These names are not museum plaques, they are medicine labels for specific pains of the age. When cynicism numbs your ability to hope, reach for Al-Bushra. When decisions blur into noise, sit with Al-Furqan. When anxiety ties your chest, breathe with Ash-Shifa. When you feel unanchored in a world of opinions, seek Al-Huda and watch how principles rearrange your weak, small choices into a meaningful pattern. The Quran also names itself dhikr for another reason. To be remembered is to be present, and to remember is to make space. Each recitation opens a room inside you where better choices become easier because they now have furniture to sit on. And when the book is called Nur, it teaches you that light does not fight darkness by wrestling it. Light out-exists it by shining. Let the names be your switches. On days when your faith is sore from too much arguing, choose Al-Hakim and read with the intention to trust divine expertise. On nights when loneliness says you are unseen, choose Ad-Dhikr and remember that to be remembered by God is to be held. The more you learn its names, the more you learn your own needs, and the more precisely you will drink from the verses that quench. These names also signal posture. If it is Furqan, approach with willingness to be corrected. If it is Shifa, approach with the humility of a patient, not the arrogance of a critic. If it is Huda, arrive as a traveler ready to follow signs rather than argue with them. And when it declares itself Aziz, arrive with respect that protects you from treating sacred words as raw material for ego projects. This naming is itself mercy, because it prevents the common mistake of using one verse to ignore another, or using a legal passage to silence a moral one, or using a moral passage to dismiss a legal one. The names harmonize the book into a single character, truthful, gentle, firm, luminous, so that the reader grows into harmony as well. Think of how life changes when a person keeps two names at the front of their day. Furqan in the morning to choose clearly, Shifa at night to heal kindly. That person will spend the afternoon differently and speak in the evening differently, and those small differences compounded across months become guidance turned into a biography. The Quran's names also educate the emotions. Fear is trimmed to its proper size by Aziz, hope is inflated to its rightful scope by Bushra, curiosity is given a ladder by Bayan, and humility is given a home by Hakim. When these emotional truths settle, you find yourself less reactive and more responsive, less obsessed with winning an argument and more committed to winning a heart, including your own. And in this way, the names of the Quran act like milestones on a pilgrimage that ends where it begins, in the recognition that the one who named the book is the one who named you servant, and that both names liberate rather than confine. The Quran's language is not merely beautiful, it is purposeful beauty form in the service of truth, music harnessed to meaning, architecture designed for traffic, not display. When scholars speak of ijaz, the inimitability of the Quran, they are not pointing to a single trick, but to an orchestra of devices that no human composition has ever assembled with this balance and power. Start with the Arabic root system, where 3 letters often seed a garden of related meanings, allowing a verse to whisper connections even as it speaks plainly. A single root can appear as noun, verb, adjective, and pattern, weaving a semantic web that holds together themes like truth and falsehood, patience and haste, guidance and wandering. This is why the Quran teaches beyond translation. Translation carries the water of meaning, but the well of resonance sits in the etymological earth. Then consider its ring compositions, where beginnings and endings mirror one another, so that a surah can be read like a circle, opening ideas return as closing confirmations. Inner panels pair like wings, and a central pivot carries the heart of the message. Such symmetry trains attention, helping the listener store meaning not as a list, but as a structure, which is how memory prefers to keep precious things. The Quran also uses Saj, a measured cadence that is neither the forced rhyme of poetry nor the flatness of ordinary prose. It is a living rhythm that engages the ear without enslaving the message to meter. This allows sudden shifts in tone, a warning, then a mercy, a question, then an answer, an oath by dawn, then an unveiling of accountability, each shift landing with precision because the language is agile. Its oaths are not decorations, but courtroom procedures that summon creation as witness, by the fig and the olive, by the star when it descends, by the racing horses, by the morning brightness, by time itself. The world becomes a syllabus, and the human becomes a student, enrolled in a course where weather, seasons, crops, and conscience are chapters. The Quran speaks in images that can be seen by villagers and philosophers alike, hearts that rust and need polishing, a good word like a tree whose roots are firm and branches reach the sky, the rain that revives a dead land the way guidance revives a tired soul. The rhetoric plays with contrast to pull truth into relief. Do they equal the blind and the seeing, the darkness and the light, the living and the dead, until even the stubborn mind concedes the simplicity of what it had complicated? At other times it compresses oceans into droplets, distilling monotheism into a handful of words that carry an eternity's worth of theology, so that a child can memorize what scholars spend lifetimes unpacking. Paronomasia, the play of related sounds, appears not as a pun to amuse, but as a gentle tether that keeps allied ideas from drifting apart. Antithesis sharpens choices. Chiasmus crosses meanings so that each half reflects and completes the other. Ellipsis leaves out what your heart already knows to supply, drawing you in as participant instead of spectator. And then there is Nazm, the coherence of discourse by which topics that seem to change are secretly joined, the way a river seems to bend while still moving toward the sea. A legal instruction appears after a moral story because law without story hardens, and story without law softens too much. Together they school the whole person. The Quran also persuades by asking questions that make denial feel exhausting. Were they created from nothing, or were they themselves the creators? It challenges without insulting, calls without groveling, and consoles without lying about the cost of truth. The miracle includes how the same verse speaks across times and places. To a trader in a market, it sounds like ethics. To a parent at bedtime, it sounds like mercy. To a leader facing temptation, it sounds like accountability. To a student in doubt, it sounds like clarity. This portability of meaning, without distortion of intent, is part of the sign. Then there is the precision of word choice. When the Quran describes knowledge, it grades it knowledge from God, knowledge by inference, knowledge guessed at, so that arrogance has nowhere to hide. When it speaks of human beings, it uses terms that reveal layers: insan for the forgetful creature, bashar for the biological being, abd for the devoted servant, each word locating you differently in the story of responsibility. It pairs commands with reasons so obedience is intelligent, not blind, and it pairs prohibitions with wiser alternatives so restraint becomes a dignified choice, not a resentful loss. The miracle is also musical in a way that strengthens memory without chaining meaning to melody. Recitation reveals how elongated vowels, glottal stops, and soft merges create waves that carry concepts farther into the heart. Tajweed is not ornament, it is ethics. Giving every letter its right is training for giving every person their right. The language sometimes shifts pronouns or tenses mid-passage, a controlled modulation called iltifat, not to confuse but to awaken and to signal that the one speaking controls time, perspective, and audience with equal ease. And because it is God who speaks, the Quran can address the prophet with intimacy, humanity with breadth, and the hypocrite with X-ray clarity in the span of a few lines without losing coherence. Its metaphors are disciplined, never trivializing the sacred, never deifying the mundane, yet always near enough to daily life that a shepherd and a scientist can nod at the same sentence for different but harmonious reasons. The book never flatters your laziness. It respects your mind by giving evidence, and your soul by giving reminders, and it respects your freedom by calling, not coercing. And the greatest linguistic wonder is that it reforms the speaker. People who give their tongues to its cadences often find their character begin to rhyme with its ethics. Truth told more gently, criticism offered more justly, gratitude spoken more promptly. Language becomes a ladder out of pettiness, and thought becomes a mirror polished by frequent washing in meanings that refuse to endorse cruelty. Those who attempted to imitate its style produced echoes that sounded clever but felt hollow, because the Quran's strength is not in ornament alone, but in the impossible alignment of perfect truth, perfect aim, and perfect delivery. A human can sometimes reach one of those, rarely two, never all three, and never for long. Listen long enough, and you will notice another miracle, the way the Quran can be recited for hours without the heart tiring when attention is sincere. That is not normal for speech, that is a signature. So when you open your mushaf and the letters look like hills and valleys, remember that you are stepping into a landscape designed for travel. The paths are meaningful, the bridges are tested, the shade is intentional, and the destination is not merely more information, but a better you, one whose tongue is kinder, whose choices are clearer, whose hope is sturdier, and whose worship is wiser. If you let this language live in you, your language will begin to live for others, and that too is part of the miracle. A book that teaches humanity how to speak to God and, in learning to do so, teaches humanity how to speak to each other. Tajweed is not a decorative flourish for the pious. It is the ethics of the tongue learning, mercy, discipline, and intention through sound. When you recite with Tajweed, you are practicing justice at the level of letters, giving each consonant its full right, stretching each long vowel only as far as it was meant to travel, softening where softness was decreed, and stopping where wisdom asks you to stop. This is why scholars called recitation an act of worship even before you understand every shade of meaning. Worship appears in the care you show the words of God, the patience you invest in each makhraj, the gentleness with which your breath escorts a verse to its landing. The manners of recitation are small doors that open into vast rooms. Begin with isti'adah, seeking refuge, then say the basmalah and let the name of the most merciful oil the gears of your heart so that every sound moves cleanly. Sit with a body that signals respect, with a heart that expects healing, with a tongue that refuses arrogance, and notice how even the muscles of your face begin to learn humility. When a verse of mercy arrives, allow your hope to brighten. When a warning arrives, let your conscience straighten. When prostration is invited, answer with your forehead, because comprehension is unfinished until the body agrees. Recitation is companionship. You keep company with the book until its tone becomes your tone and its pace becomes your patience. Those who read consistently discover that the Quran trains more than memory. Your breath deepens, your anxieties unclench, your speech to people becomes cleaner because your speech to God has been washed in carefulness. Tajweed terms first sound technical: idgham, ikhar, iqlab, ikhfa, kalkala. But behind each rule sits a spiritual courtesy. When to merge and disappear yourself, when to appear and be clear, when to hold your ground and vibrate with firmness, when to veil your sound and pass through with discretion. The knowledge called qira'at widens this horizon further, not as a confusion of options, but as a tapestry of preserved modes that traveled teacher to student, chest to chest, with chains that protect fidelity. You learn that Afsh an Ashim is a river many of us drink from, but other rivers flow too: Warsh, Kalun, Kalaf each, carrying a pronunciation or shade of meaning that the earliest community heard and cherished, all within the guardrails of revelation. The miracle here is integrity, variety without contradiction, difference without chaos, nuance without tampering, like multiple paths across the same garden, all leading to water. And because the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, reviewed the Quran with Jibreel every Ramadan, the community inherited a rhythm of review that still steadies the year. The nights of standing become nights of listening, and the heart learns that the moon has phases, and so does your focus. If your mind wanders, do not panic. Bring it back gently, like returning a bird to the hand with soft palms. If your tongue trips, do not scold it. Teach it again with kindness, for harshness to yourself is not a sunnah of learning. A single letter recited correctly is a victory against the habits of haste that have colonized the modern day. A single pause in the right place is a sermon to your impulses that not everything must be rushed. The Prophet said, "The most beloved deeds are those done regularly, even if small, and recitation is the purest field to plant that hadith. 1 page a day, held with love and guarded with routine, will outgrow 100 sudden sprints that leave you exhausted." Let your voice be modest, your pace considerate, and your aim sincere. Remember that the best reciter is the one whose heart feels nearest to the meanings, not the one whose throat dazzles an audience. Some days you will feel heavy, read anyway. Some days you will feel light, do not become proud. If tears come, welcome them without performance. If they do not manufacture them. Truth has many textures, and God receives each of them. Learn to savor the ayat that the Prophet loved, Ayat al-Kursi, that declares unsleeping guardianship, the closing of Al-Baqarah, that shelters the obedient, the Mu'awidhat, that teach you how to ask for refuge from whispers and harms seen and hidden, and let them become your doors at dawn and your locks at night. Teach children to taste sounds before you drown them in technicalities. Let them love Al-Fatihah's melody and the small surahs like small lanterns, and then, as their hands and hearts grow, place the instruments of Tajweed in those hands like trusted tools. And teach elders that it is never late to polish a letter or learn a rule, because every improvement in recitation is an improvement in patience, and every improvement in patience is an improvement in life. Those who fear the complexity of rules can begin with adab, purity, direction, presence, sincerity, gentle voice, attentive ears, and a tongue that refuses to recite while backbiting or lying the rest of the day. To read the Quran with a tongue that harms people is to draw water with a hand that pokes holes in your own bucket. Fix the hand and watch the bucket hold more. To the tired heart that says, "I cannot memorize," the Quran answers, "Then memorize the routine that brings us together, for companionship is superior to a scoreboard." To the anxious heart that says, "I forget quickly," the Quran answers, "So review gently and often, for forgetting is the nature of humans and reviewing is the art of lovers. And to the proud heart that says, I recite beautifully, the Quran whispers, beautify your character to match. For a polished voice without a polished conscience is like a lamp with no oil. If recitation is how the book enters, structure is how it stays. The division into 30 ajazah is not a bureaucratic grid, but a mercy for busy lives. It gives you a month-long roadmap that you can walk at the pace of your reality. Some fold their days around a juz in Ramadan, others carry a half or a quarter in ordinary months, and many discover that a consistent rubber quarter of a juz fits perfectly between tasks, like a prayer mat fits perfectly between a door and a desk. The further sections, ahzab and ruku, are like mile markers that keep your will from stumbling. You know where to stop without severing a theme, and you know where to start without confusion. The Manzil system, which arranges a complete recitation across 7 days, offers a weekly cycle for those who want the book to pass through them as regularly as blood passes through the heart, and even if your pace is slower, the intention blazes a trail that your steps will eventually match. Build a ritual that is gentle and defensible, a time that cannot be negotiated away, a place that your body associates with calm, and a trigger that guides you there. A cup of water, a breath at the window, a tasbih that warms your palm. The Quran rewards specificity, a vague hope to read more starves, but a precise promise to read 10 minutes after Fajr and 10 before sleep multiplies. Let your routine respect seasons. When work is heavy, reduce the portion but not the bond. When travel disrupts, carry a pocket mushaf or an app and let your finger trace letters on a small screen like a pilgrim kissing a black stone, brief but committed. If illness visits, read with eyes and heart, for the intention of the incapacitated weighs heavy on the scales of the knower of intention. If joy visits, bring the book into your gratitude and let families hear a page before meals or after news, teaching the home that celebration without remembrance is a sweetness that tires the tongue. Many find it helpful to assign themes to days, mercy passages on Mondays to soften the week's start, justice passages on Wednesdays to recalibrate in the middle, gratitude passages on Fridays to season the heart for Jumu'ah, repentance passages on Sundays to launder the soul before Monday's dust returns. Others walk straight through from Al-Fatiha to An-Nas and then begin again, discovering that the second lap is not the first because their life is not the same life. Combine reading with a whisper of tadabbur, ask one sincere question of the page, carry one answer into the day, and return at night to see what changed because of it. Write a line in a small notebook. Today the verse asked me to be fair even in dislike, and then watch your tongue in a difficult conversation. Today the verse taught me that ease walks with hardship, and then look for the twin when trouble knocks. The Quran becomes heavy in your life when it becomes woven with actions, and structure is the loom where that weaving happens. Memorization is a garden best watered daily. Choose a patch small enough to finish while interest still tastes sweet. Repeat it until the syllables feel native. Pray with it that very day so the body prints it deeper, and the next dawn review before adding new sprouts. When forgetfulness bites, forgive yourself and return. For the Prophet likened Quran to a tied camel. Neglect loosens the knot, and the camel wanders. Gentle, constant knots are the art. Pair your voice with a teacher if you can, in person or online, so that your mouth is measured by a standard outside your ego. We are all biased toward thinking we sound fine. Read aloud enough to hear your own mistakes, quietly enough to respect neighbors and walls. Let your household know that this is not noise but nourishment, and involve them, because families that orbit the book tend to develop gravity against pettiness. Make friends with ruku symbols, end where the meaning rests, not mid-sentence, so your heart learns to love closure and your mind learns to love patience. Use the margins to mark moments when a verse felt personally addressed years. Later, you will revisit and find a map of mercies that carried you when you did not realize you were being carried. Do not make your structure a whip for others. Your portion is your covenant, not their cage. Encourage without shaming, invite without performing, and remember that a grandmother humming a small surah after Isha might be traveling faster toward God than a young tongue racing through a juz to impress its own reflection. If you teach the architecture of the book alongside its beauty, show how juz divisions help busy souls persist, how ahzab and manazil give options for various capacities, how themed reading builds character in deliberate layers, how the scattered moments of a modern life can be gathered by a consistent appointment with the same unchanging page. If you lead a circle, keep it tender and punctual. Nothing grows a habit like a group that starts on time and treats every participant as honored. Let the Quran be the first voice your morning hears and the last voice your night remembers. A single ayah can open the day like curtains. A single ayah can close the day like careful hands on a precious box. Know your obstacles and design around them. Put the mushaf where your eyes naturally fall. Pair your reading with tea you love. Stack your phone under the book so that to reach distractions you must first touch revelation. When the heart says, "I will start tomorrow," answer, "I will start now" with 2 lines, and keep that promise as if it were a prayer time. Over months, these small obediences become a spine of steel under clothing of kindness, and people will say you have changed. You will know you simply kept showing up. Structures also include seasons of intensification, Ramanatan's nightly rivers, the 10 days of Dhul, Ija, the odd nights you chase Laylat al-Qadr, the retreat days when you switch off the world and give the book your unshared attention, and these seasons refill the reservoir so that ordinary days can drink. Leave room for listening as part of structure. Recitation recorded by reliable voices can accompany commutes and kitchens, and though listening never replaces your own tongue's worship, it keeps the heart soaked, like plants that prefer frequent mist to rare floods. Above all, remember that structure is not a prison. It is a shoreline that makes the ocean swimmable. The goal is not to check boxes, but to change being. Not to finish pages, but to let pages finish with you the work they began. If you fall, rebuild gently and immediately. If you soar, protect humility as your shadow. Keep a portion for when you are joyful, so that joy does not make you careless, and keep a portion for when you are grieving, so that grief does not make you hopeless. A life tethered to a daily portion becomes a life tethered to peace. A heart that has a scheduled meeting with its Lord carries a secret calm that surprises even its owner. And the one who starts small today will, by the permission of God, look back in a year and find that the Quran has braided itself through their hours like gold thread, quiet, persistent, beautiful, and that the person they became was sown by verses they once struggled to pronounce. Revelation did not end and then float into history. It continued as a living trust that the community carried with awe, and the story of that carrying is a story of love organized into action. During the Prophet's lifetime, verses were not only memorized but written immediately by designated scribes on parchment, bones, leather, and palm ribs, and he himself would direct where each new verse belonged, saying, "Place this in the surah that mentions such and such," fixing an order that was not human guesswork but prophetic instruction. The final Ramadan of his life included an intensified review, with Jibreel twice rather than once sealing the recited arrangement that the companions then held in their hearts and gatherings. After his passing, the community faced a grief sharpened by danger when battles like Yamama took the lives of many memorizers, and Umar, with insight and mercy, urged the Caliph Abu Bakr to gather the Quran into a single-bound mushaf, so no verse would be lost to calamity. Zayd ibn Thabit, young in years but vast in trust, led the effort with a standard that would humble any archivist. He refused to accept a verse without two witnesses, one of writing and one of memory, so that the written page bowed to living hearts, and living hearts were checked against written lines. The result was a compiled mushaf that rested with Abu Bakr, then Umar, then entrusted to the Panafshah, the mother of the believers, becoming the reference codex that guarded the exact recited text in an age before printing presses and backups. Years later, as Islam's reach widened and accents and regional readings began to color recitation, the Caliph Uthman faced a different mercy that could become a test: the beauty of qira'at preserved from the Prophet on one hand, and the risk of regional rivalry on the other, and he acted to preserve unity without erasing authentic variety. He requested Afshah's codex, convened a committee again led by Zayd with companions from Quraysh, and produced standardized copies written in the consonantal rasm that encompassed the accepted readings, then sent those copies to the major cities, Kufa, Basra, Damascus, Mecca, Medina, and ordered that personal parchments be checked against them so the Ummah would read from one agreed line of preservation. This was not the invention of a new Quran, but the distribution of the known Quran, the recited Quran, in a form that would outlast dialects and distance, and the community recognized the wisdom by closing ranks around those copies as Mushaf al-Imam. Later, as non-Arab populations embraced Islam and Arabic itself evolved in its written conventions, scholars introduced dots to distinguish look-alike letters and vowel marks to guide pronunciation, a service associated in its early steps with Abu al-Aswad ad-Duali and refined by generations, so that the page would teach what the teacher teaches, even to a learner far away. None of these markings invented words. They clarified them, the way road signs clarify a path that already exists, and the Ummah's care over centuries became a mountain of consensus that ordinary believers could lean against without fear. Chains of transmission, ijazat, formed from teacher to student, each signature a promise that every sound had been weighed and measured, and circles of reciters recited to completion before a guide who corrected a slip before it could become a habit, building a culture where humility protected precision. The multiplicity of canonical readings remained a sign of mercy, different legitimate ways to pronounce that the Prophet himself approved across circumstances, widening meaning without breaking meaning, like windows opening on the same garden to let in different breezes of nuance. The page you hold today is a descendant of that labor, its lines the rasm of the Uthmani tradition, its vowels the care of grammarians, its pause marks the wisdom of recitation science, all of it gathered so that a child with a mushaf and a teacher can stand in the same river as a shepherd in early Medina. This history teaches more than dates, it teaches manners. It teaches that preservation loves redundancy by memory and ink, by private devotion and public consensus, by the heart's river and the page's rock. It teaches that unity does not fear scholarly nuance, but refuses ego-driven fragmentation, and that leaders serve revelation best when they protect the weak from confusion and the strong from arrogance. It teaches that the Quran is a trust that passes through hands but belongs to none of them, and that every generation is summoned to be worthy couriers rather than clever editors. It even teaches how to face modern doubts with calm. When someone asks how you know your book is preserved, you can speak of living chains, global consensus, the impossibility of a secret conspiracy in a community spread across languages and continents, and the simple miracle that a child in Jakarta and a grandmother in Dakar recite the same verse without disagreement about a word. The Quran survived deserts, kings, migrations, and revolutions not because of chance, but because of a promise. Indeed, it is we who sent down the reminder, and indeed, we will guard it, and the human story you just heard is the form that promise took in time. When you open your copy, you are not merely reading a text. You are joining a relay race whose baton never dropped, and your careful recitation, your respectful handling, your commitment to teach even one verse correctly is your turn to grip that baton with love. Let the story of compilation make you gentle with disagreements that fall within the circle of legitimacy and firm against deviations that turn the circle into a fracture, and carry yourself with the dignity of someone entrusted by history to carry words that carried history. The Quran is not a book you visit. It is a book that moves in with you, and nowhere is its residency more intimate than in prayer and the weave of daily choices that make a life. Every unit of Salah stands upon Al-Fatiha, a chapter so essential that prayer without it feels like a body without breath. And when you recite, "You alone we worship, and you alone we ask for help," you are renewing a contract that binds worship to reliance, humbling a heart that often tries to control what it must, in trust. The verses you choose after Al-Fatiha are not decorations. They are today's curriculum, and a person who selects passages on gratitude finds their complaints melt, while a person who chooses passages on justice discovers their pettiness shrinking under a wider sky. Bowing and prostration become the punctuation marks of meaning. Your spine bends under the weight of majesty in ruku, and your forehead meets the earth in sujud, when guidance penetrates enough to ask the whole body to agree. When prayers end, the book does not close. Its ethics spill out of the prayer rug and onto the street, and the same mouth that praised the Lord is now commanded to protect neighbors from its cruelty. Truthfulness in transactions becomes worship because the page you recited contains the longest verse, detailing trust and documentation, teaching you that spirituality without honesty is a shadow without a body. Mercy toward family becomes worship because the page calls to kindness with parents, justice between spouses, gentleness with children, and fairness in inheritance. Each verse a fence around dignity so that love survives routine and stress. Care for the vulnerable becomes worship because the page names the orphan, the traveler, the prisoner, the debtor, and the stranger, and asks the believer to become a shelter where their exposure ends, turning charity into architecture rather than a momentary sigh. The Quran even teaches you how to disagree. Do not let hatred of a people make you unjust. Speak with words better than the ones thrown at you. Avoid mockery and suspicion and backbiting, because communities rot from the tongue inward. And when you hear vulgarity masquerading as freedom, protect your ears by walking away without worshipping your anger. The book trains the conscience to love, repair if you wrong someone. Make it right quickly. If you see a breach, mend it before it becomes a canyon. If you cannot fix a harm, at least do not enlarge it by resentment disguised as principle. In work, the Quran recalibrates ambition by tying success to integrity. Keep promises, weigh fairly, do not devour interest, do not cheat measurements, and remember that profit without blessing is like a meal that fills the stomach but starves the soul. In leadership, it redefines strength as service. Consult your people, fulfill trusts, refuse arrogance, and accept criticism that prevents you from injuring those you were meant to protect. In solitude, it builds resilience by prescribing remembrance, reflection, and sincere repentance. The trio that clears a heart's windshield so you can see what you are doing to yourself and to others. The Quran supplies prayers for moments too heavy for improvised speech. Our Lord, do not burden us beyond what we can bear when a wave breaks over your day, or, Our Lord, grant us from our spouses and children the comfort of eyes, when you fear that love is losing its way, or, Our Lord, expand for me my chest and ease my task, when responsibility feels larger than your hands. These du'as are not slogans, they are ropes thrown from the sky, and the habit of catching them reshapes how you think under pressure. The rhythms of daily recitation become scaffolding for self-respect, morning verses that armor hope, evening verses that rinse fatigue, passages after Maghrib that gather the day's scattered pieces into gratitude, and a brief recitation before sleep that tells your fears that God is awake while you are not. The Sunnah meets the Quran here, turning instruction into imitation, politeness in greeting, cleanliness in body and space, generosity in hospitality, composure in anger, punctuality in worship, and optimism that refuses to be naive because it understands who controls outcomes. Families that weave Quran into routines do not become perfect, but they do become resilient. A child who hears a verse after dinner grows up knowing that food and meaning belong together, and an elder who hums a short surah at night reminds the house that comfort has a source beyond screens. Communities that embed Quran into conflict resolution discover that apologies become easier when everyone submits to a standard above ego. The verse is the referee, not the loudest voice, and dignity is protected for both the wounded and the wrongdoer. The book also teaches proportion, when to overlook and when to insist, when to forgive and when to set a boundary, when to be soft and when to be firm, because mercy without wisdom can enable harm, and firmness without mercy can become a second harm. It guides emotions into their healthy sizes, fear enough to prevent recklessness, hope enough to prevent despair, love enough to power sacrifice, and humility enough to make learning lifelong. It even teaches etiquette with itself. Approach with cleanliness if you can. Begin with seeking refuge and the basmalah. Recite with presence. Ponder for at least a few breaths what you have read. Act on at least one small thing the verse suggests today. And close with gratitude that you were allowed to stand before speech that angels carry. The more you let Quran define the small, the less the big will catch you unprepared. A person who learns to say a true sentence when it is costly will be ready to say a true sentence when it is dangerous, and a person who trains to give in secret when money is tight will be ready to give in public without theatrics when God lifts their means. In grief, the Quran dignifies tears and redirects them toward patience that trusts reward. In joy, it cools excitement with remembrance, so blessings do not become idols. In confusion, it distinguishes conscience from impulse by reminding you that what God loves does not require you to betray someone else's rights. Carry it into your career so that competence becomes a form of worship, into your friendships so that loyalty is braided with counsel, into your studies so that knowledge polishes character rather than inflates pride, and into your leisure so that rest renews purpose rather than erode it. If you feel far, do not dramatize distance. Open to a single page and let a single command shape a single hour, then repeat tomorrow and let the compound interest of obedience surprise you. If you feel close, protect closeness with gratitude and service, for nothing spoils a blessing faster than attributing it to your brilliance rather than to mercy that chose you. And remember that every recitation you offer in prayer sends roots into your day, your business emails, your road temper, your appetite, your laughter, until the tree of worship bears fruit the world can eat. And God writes in your ledger not only verses recited, but harms prevented and comforts delivered by a heart that learned its manners from the book. Adam's story does not begin with shame, but with honor, and that changes how the fall feels and how the return works. He was taught the names of things, entrusted with representation, and placed in a garden where obedience was simple and clarity was bright. yet even there the whisper threaded doubt through ease. When Adam slipped, the Quran does not fixate on blame, it spotlights the door that opened when he turned back. Our Lord, we have wronged ourselves. If you do not forgive us and have mercy upon us, we will surely be among the losers. This one prayer taught humanity that repentance is not a season, it is an address you can always return to, a key that still fits even after you swear you will never misplace it again. Shaitan's refusal to bow grew from pride that preferred a narrative about fire and clay over a command from the Lord of fire and clay, and that pride becomes a mirror for us whenever we begin to defend a mistake rather than repair it. The lesson is crisp. The sin that hurries to repentance becomes a bruise that heals, while the pride that refuses becomes a fracture that spreads. News years, a lifetime of calling day and night, remind you that faith grows on the timeline of trees, not fireworks. He built an ark under a sky that was still clear, and the mockers laughed because they mistook delay for denial. But delay in the Quran is often mercy, time for return, room for reflection, space for people to choose dignity without the panic of disaster. When water finally rose, it carried those who trusted and exposed those who trusted their sarcasm, and the image of a ship riding waves like mountains teaches that salvation may look like wood and rope to the eye, but to the heart it is obedience shaped into shelter. Ibrahim's path runs through fires that cool and migrations that become beginnings. He questions idols not with cruelty but with clarity, asking a people to notice that their carved hopes neither speak nor save, and when confronted by power, he answers with arguments that respect the listener enough to offer reasons. He and Hajar leave a child in a valley with a prayer and a trust, and Zamzam answers. Years later, he and Ismail raise foundations with hands that learn to hold knives but are commanded to hold bricks, because Islam turns tests into architecture. His debates and his building echo a single theme. You can be gentle and unshakable at once, and friendship with God is not a title. It is a biography written by acts that match promises. Musa stands at the red line where fear meets command. He faces Pharaoh, who weaponized propaganda and spectacle, and yet the Quran shows Musa instructed to speak gently as the first style of truth, even when confronting tyranny, because harshness is not proof of courage, principle is. He learns patience with Khidr, witnessing actions that offend the eye while hiding mercy beneath, and that travel teaches that knowledge without patience misreads the script of the day and slanders the wisdom of God. When sea opens and staff turns serpent, the point is not magic. It is the reminder that creation bends when the Creator wills, and the believer walks forward with wet ankles and a heart that finally sees that obedience is the only rational strategy in a world authored by God. Maryam's solitude is not abandonment, it is preparation. Provision arrives from the unseen, and accusation arrives from the seen, but the infant answers her accusers with speech granted by the one who grants tongues, and her story becomes a refuge for anyone who has told the truth and been met with suspicion. Yusuf's saga is the school of delayed justice betrayed by brothers, confined after refusing sin, forgotten by those freed, then raised by God through a dream he never stopped honoring. When power finally rests in his hand, he chooses forgiveness and the reunion of family over revenge, teaching that the sweetness of closure is greater than the salt of payback. Sulaiman asks for a kingdom none after him will have, but pairs it with gratitude and service. Dawood prays in the night and judges in the day. Ayub loses and loses and loses, until patience becomes a garment that no blade can cut, and then God returns with a kindness that shows wounds can become windows. The Quran stories are not there to entertain boredom, they are there to calibrate the heart's compass. In them the oppressed learn dignity without bitterness, the The powerful learn humility without theatrics, and ordinary people learn that small, honest choices thread a path through storms. Even the nation of Yunus, who were spared after he left them in anger, reveal a rare mercy. Collective repentance can intercept collective ruin, so do not underestimate what communal humility can do in the face of communal error. And when you meet Dhul Qarnayn, you meet strength that asks, "How can I help?" and uses walls not to imprison the innocent, but to protect them. A portrait of leadership that spends its glory plugging the holes where harm leaks in. Let these stories judge your days. When you are tempted to deny an error because apology is embarrassing, remember Adam. When persistence feels pointless, remember Nuh. When a test looks like a knife, remember Ibrahim. When rage asks to be your method, remember Musa's gentleness. When slander scorches, remember Maryam's answer from God. When time seems unfair, remember Yusuf's ark. When pain lingers, remember Ayub's patience. When power arrives, remember Sulaiman's gratitude. When cities need protection, remember Dhul Qarnayn's service. The Quran tells stories to sculpt reflexes, so that righteousness becomes quicker than regret. And every time you revisit them, you do not meet new stories, you meet a new you, and the old story teaches the new you again with unexhausted wisdom. There are verses the Ummah has learned to carry, like keys on a ring, verses that fit the locks of fear, grief, confusion, hazard, and daily wear. Ayat al-Kursi is the declaration of the living, the ever-existing, the one whom neither slumber nor sleep overtakes, whose ownership needs no notary, and whose preservation of the heavens and the earth does not strain him. And every phrase in that verse is a medicine against imagining a tired God or a chaotic cosmos. When you read it after prayers or before sleep, you are not reciting a charm, you are renewing a worldview in which the one guarding you does not blink. The last two of Al-Baqarah arrive like rain at the end of a long day, beginning with a creed that believers echo, "We hear and we obey," and moving into a prayer that knows the human threshold better than we do. Our Lord, do not burden us beyond what we can bear. These verses carry promise of protection for the house that hosts them at night, as taught by the Prophet, and they teach a theology of mercy that keeps scrupulous souls from drowning in their own standards. The Mu'awwidhat al-Falaq and An-Nas train the tongue to seek refuge from harms outside and harms inside, from the prick of envy that can sour blessings to the whisper that curls itself around intention and pulls it toward show or spite. They are short enough for a child and deep enough for a scholar, and their daily use polishes a shield you did not know you were missing until you realize your agitation shortens when you guard your mornings and evenings with them. Surah Al-Ikhlas condenses Tawheed into a chalice small enough for the hand of a child. God, one, needed by all, he begets not, nor is he begotten, and there is none comparable to him, so that the heart drinks clarity without complication, and love for that clarity counts like a third of the Quran in reward, because it carries the axis on which all meaning turns. The opening of Al-Fatiha is itself protection because it aligns a wandering will with the straight road, and a person who closes their day with Al-Fatiha, Ayat al-Kursi, and the Mu'awwidhat has placed posts around the night that tell fear and envy they must stop at the fence. There are other keys too. Al-Mulk teaches that sovereignty is not for sale, and that the one who made death and life is training you in excellence, so its nightly recitation becomes a friend in the grave by God's permission. Al-Kahf on Fridays lights a week and carries warnings about Dajjal's deceit by teaching the antidote's truth over spectacle, patience with the wise, even when you do not grasp their method, gratitude over arrogance when gardens flourish, and using power to protect rather than parade. Yasin, often recited over the ill and the dying, softens hearts with reminders of resurrection and the ease with which the one who first created can create again, smoothing the passage between worlds for the listener and the reciter both. Al-Waqiyah whispers about provision so that greed loosens its grip and panic over wealth learns proportion, a practice many have found calms the chest that is tight about tomorrow's bread. The Prophet taught the morning and evening adhkar, packets of Quran and supplication that function like spiritual hygiene. Neglect them and grime accumulates, keep them and the soul stays limber under pressure. And yet the power is never in syllables alone, it is in the belief and obedience that accompany them. A person who seeks refuge from envy while spending hours provoking envy online is like someone who asks for rain and then opens an umbrella when mercy begins. Align behavior with prayer and watch protection become visible. A person who recites verses of trust and then manipulates every situation to avoid depending on God treats the words as ornaments. Treat them as contracts, and the world's noise will feel less sovereign over your moods. These verses also train you to put fear in its place. Fear of harm invites refuge, not paralysis. Fear of poverty invites charity and lawful striving, not hoarding that insults the provider. Fear of people invites living for God's gaze, which is the only gaze permanent enough to warrant anxiety. Carry the keys and teach them to your family. Let children see you blow the mu'awwid hat into your hands and wipe over them before bed. Let spouses hear al-mulk before lights out. Let friends receive a message of al-ikhlash when life confuses them, not as superstition but as steadying truth. And for those heavy days when the mind is too tired to argue with despair, let the tongue move anyway. Sometimes the heart catches up to words said faithfully and finds itself held by a strength that does not issue from willpower but from remembrance. Protection in the Quran is not the promise of no storms, it is the promise of a reliable harbor and a repaired hull, and people who dock there regularly learn to sail again without the ship becoming their god. Etiquette with the book begins before you touch a page and continues after you close it, because adab is the architecture that makes love durable. Begin with intention clear enough to speak. I am approaching to seek guidance, to worship by reciting, to act on at least one thing I learned today, for intentions are doors, and clear doors swing open more easily. Cleanliness honors the one who spoke wudu if possible, a clean space if you can manage it, a heart that refuses to make the tongue recite while the mind scrolls as much as you are able, not as a barrier, but as a courtesy. Seek refuge from shaitan and say the basmalah so that mercy frames your reading, and then give the Quran your face and your time. If you must stop, stop with respect and return with eagerness, the way you would treat a beloved friend who deserves more than distracted nods. Give letters their rights and meanings their honor. Do not rush the sound so fast that the sense cannot keep up, and do not dive into interpretations beyond you without a teacher, for the book is clear in its message, yet layered in its sophistication, and humility is safety gear. Keep a small notebook, not as a performance, but as a promise to capture one seed per session, an insight, an intention, an action, so that reading does not evaporate. Write, for writing is a net that catches what memory drops. When a verse of mercy comes, ask. When a warning comes, seek protection. When a command comes, plan a step. When a prohibition comes, identify a habit to starve. When a story comes, locate yourself among the characters and choose to be the one who grows. If you encounter a verse of sajda, honor it with prostration when you can, for the body learns faster than the mind that the one speaking is above you and for you. Handle the mushaf gently, keep it elevated if possible. Avoid placing it carelessly under piles of life, and let your children see your hands treat it like a treasure. What children watch, they worship. Do not weaponize verses against those you wish to defeat in arguments. Let the first target of correction be your own ego, and you will find your counsel gains a fragrance that makes it easier for others to inhale. If you memorize, preserve with review, and recite in prayer so that what you carry does not sit idle. The Prophet likened Quran to a tied camel. Review is the rope, negligence the loosened knot. Attend gatherings of recitation and explanation when you can, and arrive on time. Collective adab trains personal adab, and communities that keep the book dear become communities that keep people safe. Ask your questions respectfully and accept "I do not know" from teachers as a sign of their fear of God, not their lack of intelligence. A scholar who refuses to guess is a scholar who will not gamble with your afterlife. If a recitation corrects you, thank the one who corrected. To be corrected is to be cared for, and the devil hates nothing more than a humble student who cannot be baited into vanity. Teach what you learn without turning your home into a podium. Small circles, gentle sharing, and practical applications teach better than speeches. Let the Quran regulate your tongue between readings. Refuse backbiting, sarcasm that wounds, false witness disguised as humor, and the habit of exaggeration that erodes trust, because a tongue that injures all day cannot expect to taste sweetness at night. Tie your recitation to service. If a verse exalts generosity, give. If it condemns deception, audit your income. If it praises patience, wait kindly in the very place you usually snap. If it commands justice, apologize to the person you wronged rather than drafting excuses. Protect your sincerity by hiding some worship. Let a portion of your reading be unknown to anyone but your Lord, so that your heart has a private garden no passerby can trample. And protect your perseverance by making a public commitment to a small circle, family, friends, a class, so that love and accountability help you on days your will is thin. Do not turn etiquette into elitism. The book came for shepherds and sultans alike, and the most honored reader is the most obedient, not the most ornate. If you break a routine, restart without drama. Guilt that keeps you away is a trick, while regret that brings you closer is a gift. If you are new, begin with short surahs and consistency. If you are seasoned, deepen tadabbur and teach gently. If you are tired, let listening carry you until energy returns. If you are thriving, protect humility by crediting every ease to the one who made reading sweet. And when you close the mushaf, do not close the meeting. Carry one verse out into the day like a lantern and check in at night to see where it lit your path. The etiquette of the Quran forms a person who is not easily shaken by fashion, not easily seduced by applause, not easily angered by insult, because their worth is anchored in a conversation older than the mountains and nearer than their jugular. Such a person will fail and rise, weep and wipe, stumble and study, but they will keep walking, and the book will keep walking with them, until the day when the one who spoke it says, "Read and rise," and every practiced letter becomes a step, every sincere intention becomes a rung, and every secret act becomes a light that proves the etiquette was never about rules. It was about friendship with the word of the one who made words. Work is not separate from worship in the Quran. It is one of the places where worship proves itself. The page that commands prayer also commands truth in contracts, fairness in weights and measures, and mercy toward those whose bargaining position is weak, because God knows that character is most visible where profit is within reach. When you enter your workplace or open your shop or log on to your tasks, renew intention and say, "I do this to provide lawfully, to serve people well, and to avoid harming anyone," and watch how that single intention pulls scattered actions into a line that points to God. Give more than you promise, and promise less than your ego wants. because trust is a currency God multiplies, and deceit is a currency God curses. The Quran's insistence on writing debts and witnessing transactions is not suspicion of friends. It is protection of friendships from the amnesia of time and the pressure of need. Keep clean records, document agreements, and speak clearly. For ambiguity breeds resentment, and clarity is mercy disguised as paperwork. If you hire, pay promptly and with dignity, remembering the teaching that a worker's sweat should not dry before wages are given. And if you are hired, deliver your side with excellence, because ihsan is not a mood, it is the Muslim way of doing ordinary things. Avoid riba, even if everyone around you treats it as normal. And when tempted, remember that apparent ease can be a trap that corrodes blessings. While the lawful may feel narrow, but leads to spaciousness of heart and success that lasts longer than applause. Do not monopolize, hoard, or exploit scarcity to injure the vulnerable, and remember that generosity does not reduce wealth in God's arithmetic. It unlocks reservoirs you could not have imagined, sometimes in sustenance, sometimes in serenity, sometimes in doors opening where there were only walls yesterday. Keep promises at home as fiercely as you keep promises at work, for the Quran ties truthfulness to faith itself, and a person whose calendar is honest becomes a person whose heart is believable. If you supervise others, treat authority as a trust, not a throne. Consult those affected by your decisions, accept correction without rage, and protect the quiet from the loud, so that justice does not become a competition of volume. If you are led by others, offer counsel without contempt, patience without passivity, and excellence without flattery, because communities flourish when humility and responsibility meet in the same room. Guard your tongue in hallways and group chats. The page that forbids backbiting is trying to keep the fabric of trust from tearing. And every time you refuse gossip, you patch a hole you may never even see. If you slip and speak ill, apologize quickly and undo what you can. Do not let the devil convince you that embarrassment is a greater harm than injustice. Be gentle with parents, generous with neighbors, attentive to the stranger who looks lost at the edge of the crowd, and deliberate in giving the orphan and the debtor their rights, because the Quran repeats their names not by accident, but because societies forget them first. Treat the earth as a trust too. Do not waste water even at a flowing river. Do not poison what others must drink. Do not devastate land for short benefit, because corruption on land and sea is the work of hands that forgot whose creation they are touching. Tie your spiritual practice to practical reform. If you recite verses about justice, let your emails become kinder and more exact. If you contemplate patience, let it show on your steering wheel. If you reflect on charity, quietly set up a small standing donation so your heart's gate opens even on days when zeal is asleep. Bring the Quran to conflict by asking for facts, recognizing emotion, and choosing words better than the ones thrown at you. Because dignity is not a luxury item, it is the uniform of a believer. And in all of this, keep returning to the straight path prayer in Al-Fatiha. For guidance is not a one-time gift, but a daily bread, and every honest task done for God's sake becomes a bead on the same string that holds your prostrations together. Time in the Quran is not a backdrop, it is a witness, and its testimony is sharp. By time, surely humanity is in loss, the verse announces, and then hands you a map out of the losing column: faith, righteous deeds, mutual truth-telling, and mutual patience. Faith roots identity in something larger than moods, which are weather, not climate. Righteous deeds convert belief into evidence that both heaven and your neighbors can see. Truth-telling keeps illusions from nesting in your friendships, and patience turns the revolving door of setbacks into a hallway that actually leads somewhere. trials in the Quran are not surprises to God or punishments by default. They are appointments with growth, sometimes to remove arrogance, sometimes to awaken gratitude, sometimes to prepare you to help someone else staggering toward the same door next year. Hardship and ease travel together like twins recorded in the same birth certificate, and when you meet one, you should look for the other's shadow. Often it is already at your feet, but panic has narrowed your vision. Patience is not clenched teeth and silence alone. It is intelligent endurance paired with lawful action, an art of tying your camel and then resting your heart, a refusal to sprint off a cliff or lie down in the road. Gratitude is not a speech you give. It is a redirecting of credit to the giver and a use of gifts in the way the giver loves. And God promises more for those who practice it. Sincerely, more capacity, more clarity, more openings that are not always material but always meaningful. When time wounds, repent quickly, because early treatment prevents scars from hardening into pride. When time blesses, humble yourself, because abundance tempts the soul to believe its own press releases. Use mornings like a launch pad, prayers, small reading, one decisive act toward a good goal, and guard nights like a fortress. Account yourself. Seek forgiveness. Plant tomorrow's intention, because days become years, and years become legacies while you are busy thinking you are only choosing a snack. Learn the cadence of seasons the Quran honors: Ramadan for retreat and generosity, the sacred months for restraint, Fridays for communal remembrance, odd nights for seeking what cannot be scheduled by human calendars, and ordinary Tuesdays for faithful ordinary obedience that often weighs more than the special moments we keep chasing. Do not live in yesterday's regrets or tomorrow's fantasies at the cost of today's responsibilities. Tawakkul belongs to the present tense, where decisions are made. If you are tested by loss, say what the patients say: we belong to God and to Him we return, and then do the next right thing you actually can do. If you are tested by insult, let restraint be your first response and principled speech your second. Anger's first draft is rarely worth publishing. If you are tested by delay, revise your definition of success from speed to steadiness. Many of God's best gifts arrive on the schedule that grows your roots, not your excitement. Keep company with people who remind you of truth and train you in patience, because the surah ties salvation to community on purpose. Lone wolves look heroic in stories and hungry in life. Keep a small ledger of favors to oppose the brain's bias for complaint, and rehearse your du'as so that when the storm hits your lips, already know the route to harbor. Remember that your clock is different from someone else's clock. Envy is the theft of both gratitude and time, and comparing chapters across lives confuses plot with page count. Time will pass whether you honor it or not, but it will testify differently about you depending on how you spent it. Did you mend or tear, build or burn, worship or wander, return or rationalize? Let each sunset be a small day of judgment in your house, a moment to ask, what did I do with the breaths I borrowed? And then sleep like someone who has repented and planned, not like someone who has despaired or denied. On the day when time testifies in full, patience will not sound like a dull word anymore. It will sound like a key you kept on your person, and doors will answer to it. The legal verses of the Quran are often misunderstood by those who have only met them as headlines. They are not a cold system imposed on warm people, but a warm protection shaped into clear lines, so that dignity does not always depend on the mood of those in power. Law in the Quran is braided with mercy and purpose, protecting religion, life, intellect, lineage, and property. And when you see a rule, ask what harm it is blocking and what good it is opening, because that is how law becomes a servant of compassion rather than a weapon of control. Marriage guidance begins with kindness and ends with kindness, teaching mutual rights, urging gentleness, warning against contempt, and if separation becomes necessary, demanding fairness, respect, and truthful record so that people can part without destroying each other's futures. Inheritance rules seem technical until you see their mercy. They prevent the strong from swallowing the weak. They honor women's shares where cultures once erased them. They recognize extended family that love sometimes forgets, and they convert a grief's chaos into a map that avoids battles later. Guardianship over orphans' wealth is treated as sacred. Do not approach it except in ways that protect and increase it for them, because the Quran places fire on the table of those who eat the property of the vulnerable. Testimony is regulated to protect truth from bias and forgetfulness, reminding you that even honest people misremember, and that systems should help honesty win by design, not by miracle. Commerce is fenced by prohibitions on riba, fraud, gambling, and ambiguity that breeds conflict, and it is watered by commands to write, witness, measure fairly, and fulfill trusts, because economies are healthiest when consciences are educated and rules are clear. Retribution is balanced by invitations to forgiveness, teaching that justice repairs order while mercy repairs hearts, and communities must learn when to apply which, so that neither cruelty nor naivety rules the day. The Quran's approach to public ethics consultation, keeping covenants even with opponents, honoring treaties until openly renounced, avoiding betrayal, and forbidding collective punishment, builds a society where strength is not license and weakness is not a sentence. Even the discipline of oaths is addressed so that speech regains weight and promises do not become decorations. Break an oath lawfully only with expiation and humility, because language without accountability is violence in slow motion. Modesty codes are not about shaming bodies, they are about shielding hearts and regulating the gaze so that desire serves marriage and community instead of burning them. Punishments, where they exist, function as deterrents, framed by conditions so careful that due process is not optional but integral. Scholars across centuries developed principles of evidence and doubt that tilt the system toward mercy without letting impunity breed more victims. Repentance is always open. Even those who fracture public order are invited back through sincerity and repair, because God loves returners, and a legal system without a theology of hope becomes a factory for criminals rather than a school for citizens. The verses also train personal lawfulness. Do not invade others' privacy. Ask permission before entering homes. Return greetings with better ones. Do not raise your voice above the prophets, or, by extension, above truth and wisdom in any age, and step aside for others in gatherings so that space is shared like water. The law teaches you how to be powerful safely and how to be vulnerable with protection, and both are needed because every human plays both roles across a life. Keep in mind that legal texts live in a tradition of scholars who read them with the Prophet's way as lens, and the Prophet's way is gentleness, gradualism, avoidance of hardship, and preference for ease where God has allowed it. When you seek a fatwa, seek it from people who fear God more than they fear your disappointment, who can say, "I do not know," who understand context without bending revelation to fashion, and who love mercy enough to keep you safe from both panic and permissiveness. If you lead a household, enforce rules with fairness, not fury, and let apologies be frequent from all sides. If you run a business, put compliance with divine ethics above clever loopholes. If you serve in public office, treat the treasury as a trust and the citizen as a bearer of rights before they are a source of taxes. If you are wronged, pursue remedy without hatred consuming your worship, and if you have wronged, confess and repair. Because the law is not just about winning, it is about healing. See how these legal fences guard gardens, the Quran grows marriage preserved, wealth circulated, orphans secured, speech dignified, neighbors honored, worship protected, and you will love the law rather than resent it. Remember that the Prophet's first community moved from persecution to power, and the law moved with them, from surviving cruelty in Mecca to administering justice in Medina. And that arc explains why rules exist: to convert faith into a civilization of compassion where the weak can sleep. So let the law sit in your heart beside mercy, not across from it. And when you read a command, ask how obeying it will protect someone near you today. And when you read a prohibition, ask who it will keep safe from harm you might not even notice. And you will find that obedience stops feeling like restriction and starts feeling like participation in God's care for His creation. Creation in the Quran is not wallpaper behind your life. It is a living syllabus that teaches you how to think, feel, and walk. The sky stretched without visible pillars invites you to look up and remember scale, because small problems often grow monstrous when the ceiling of remembrance is low. Stars become not only navigation for caravans, but navigation for the heart. Tiny torches that remind you guidance is not always a floodlight. Sometimes it is a single point that keeps you oriented through darkness. Winds that push clouds are verses in motion, delivering rain by command, so that thirsting earth and thirsting souls receive mercy measured in drops rather than dumps, teaching that most lasting change arrives in steady kindness. Mountains nail the earth, and your conscience is asked to nail your choices so that values do not slide every time fashion trembles. Rivers carve valleys and patience carves habits, and both seem slow until one day you wake up and a canyon of character stands where impulsiveness used to live. Bees are mentioned not for sweetness alone, but for discipline. They travel, collect, return, share, and their miracle is a community with structure, a mercy that tastes like honey because everyone accepted their portion of duty. Dates and olives appear as signs that provision is both simple and sacred, and the way a stone splits to cradle a seed is the way hardship splits to cradle growth if you plant right acts in the crack. The alternation of night and day is a reminder that your heart needs both brightness and shade. The believer who refuses rest breaks the instrument of worship, and the one who rejects effort forgets that dawn asks for footsteps. Even your own body is a classroom where the Quran teaches heartbeat as dhikr, breath as patience training, hunger as humility tutor, sleep as surrender practice, and waking as resurrection rehearsal, so that the path to God is not only in mosques, but also in kitchens, streets, desks, and beds. When the Quran swears by figs, olives, time, the sun, the night, it is not idolizing nature, it is deputizing it, turning creation into witnesses that testify about the Creator's wisdom and your responsibilities within it. Corruption on land and sea is described as the work of human hands, and the sea foam on modern shores is not innocent of our decisions, which means stewardship is not a niche hobby, but an act of worship woven into daily choices, consumption, waste, gratitude, and care. The camel, the bird, the ant, the spider's house, each are used with precision to make moral argument visible. A camel's creation challenges the arrogant to admit craftsmanship. Bird's flight shows trust that is not laziness. Ants model consultation and planning, and a spider's web becomes a metaphor for fragile, false alliances that glitter until a storm touches them. Creation teaches proportion. You are not the center, but you are not random either. And between insignificance and arrogance lies servanthood, the posture that allows awe to become ethics. Rain revives dead earth, and verses revive numb hearts, which is why the Quran repeats, resurrection through botany. You have already watched the dead rise every spring, so do not pretend the final rising is absurd. Thunder glorifies with praise, lightning strikes fear and hope, Clouds weighed down move at mercy's pace, and the farmer who trusts the unseen seed to soil becomes a parable for spiritual cultivation, till plant, water, wait, weed, and harvest then begin again. This is how creation becomes a mirror where you see yourself clearly. A crooked scale condemns your business, a polluted river rebukes your waste, a generous tree invites your charity, a path beaten by many feet questions your choice to isolate, and the ant that stores for winter teaches you to plan without worshipping control. The Quran's classroom is open all day, tuition is gratitude, textbooks are everywhere, and exams come in the form of temptations to ignore what you have just learned when convenience winks. If you want to grow, take field notes, pause under a tree and say, "Root me like this." Watch a sunrise and say, "Let my repentance look like that." Hear thunder and say, "Let my conscience sound like this when I approach a boundary." You will find that seasons begin to baptize your habits, spring, births, projects. Summer strengthens perseverance. Autumn teaches release. Winter deepens contemplation, and the one who wrote the world wrote your path through it if you keep reading. The companions of the cave are youth with backbones of faith, and their story is a map for anyone who discovers that truth has suddenly made old rooms too small. They did not hold a conference on courage. They walked, trusting that a small step toward God is a wide road under His guard, and the cave that looks like a dead end to fear became a sanctuary when prayer crossed its threshold. Their sleep lengthened into years none could count precisely, and the point is not to entertain the curious, but to educate the curd. Anxious time bends when God wishes, and preservation is not limited to locks and armies. When they woke, the coin in their hand betrayed history's passage, a reminder that your sincerity might carry you across years you cannot plan, and that God returns the faithful to the world at the moment. Their honesty will teach others what books cannot. In the same surah, a man with 2 gardens walks through green corridors, intoxicated by yield, until gratitude becomes optional and then impossible. He mistook abundance for endorsement, and the storm of consequence taught him that planting seeds without planting humility invites a harvest of regret. The parable is medicine for every season of success. Say Masha Allah, not as superstition but as theology. Invest in people as well as profits. Share water, and remember that the fastest way to rot is to call your garden yours in a world where ownership is a test, not a birthright. Still in that surah, Musa travels with the wise servant who scuttles a boat, kills a youth, and repairs a wall without asking payment. 3 acts that offend the eye until their explanations untie the knot. Beneath what looked like harm was a layer of mercy, protecting the poor from a king's theft, preventing a family from a future heartbreak we cannot bear to imagine, and preserving a treasure for orphans beneath a wall about to collapse. The lesson is not that you must endure every cruelty in case it hides a blessing. The lesson is that knowledge without patience misreads events, and patience without knowledge still trusts that God's script is kinder than your speculation. Then enters Dhul Qarnayn, a leader who walks to the horizons, not to plant statues of himself, but to assess needs, consult people, combine their strength with his resources, and raise a barrier not to imprison but to protect, charging no fee for what power can do when it refuses vanity. Leadership here is service in boots, not slogans in marble, and communities are safest when strength kneels before responsibility. Surah Al-Kahf threads these parables like beads: youth and refuge, wealth and gratitude, knowledge and patience, power and service, teaching that fitna comes in many costumes and that survival requires a kit, truth, humility, sabr, and action that prefers others' safety to one's own applause. The Quran's other parables widen the school. A good word is like a tree whose roots are firm and branches reach the sky, giving fruit every season by permission. This is how one sentence of truth spoken often enough can shelter children you will never meet. A bad word is like an uprooted plant with no stability. Clever lies travel fast and die hungry. Life's glitter is compared to rain that cheers the farmer until the cycle runs its course and the earth wears a pale face. What dazzled yesterday becomes rubble tomorrow, so do not staple your heart to passing fashions. Guidance is a light in a niche, lamp inside glass, fed by blessed oil that nearly glows without fire. An image that whispers that purity increases luminosity and that some hearts become windows through which others see. Spending in the path of God is a grain that grows 7 ears, each with 100 grains. The math of mercy embarrasses calculators, and stinginess is a creed that forgets who writes yield. Those who show off charity are like rocks coated in dust, washed clean by rain, no good sticking because intentions repelled blessing. Sincerity is the soil where seeds survive storms. The parable of the donkey carrying books shames knowledge without practice, because no stack of volumes turns stubbornness into wisdom unless obedience carries meaning into habit. The web of a spider stands glittering in morning light and then tears at a child's touch, a metaphor for alliances built on sin or relationships built on appetite. They look intricate and collapse immediately. Even the parable of those who took a dog by the tail of their desires and were dragged, panting whether chased away or called near, speaks to cycles of addiction and heedlessness that exhaust the soul until remembrance returns leash to hand. Each parable is a mirror held at a merciful angle. It shows your face without humiliation and suggests correction without despair, because the aim is transformation, not theatrical guilt. Carry al-Kaf on Fridays not only as a habit, but as an antidote stored in the bloodstream against Dajjal's seductions of spectacle, against wealth's spell, against knowledge that refuses humility, and against power fattened without service, and your weak will walk straighter. When a story challenges your pride, thank it. When a parable punctures your delusion, memorize it. When a scene tenderizes your anger, revisit it. And let your life become a commentary written in choices that reflect what you learned under the shade of these divine examples. Ramadan is not a month on a calendar. It is an annual appointment with your original self. Fasting reroutes attention from appetite to intention, proving each day that you can say no to what is lawful to train for saying no to what is harmful, and by sunset you realize strength. You did not know you had came not from willpower alone, but from a secret assistance that meets those who try. The Quran was sent in this month, and the reunion between book and believer feels natural. Hunger quiets the noise. Thirst polishes listening. Nights open like calm seas, and verses travel farther into the chest because the usual traffic is light. Charity swells in Ramadan, not because wealth increases, but because hoarding looks silly when you spend every day learning to let go, and the community's table stretches until strangers feel like cousins and the poor feel like guests rather than projects. Taraweeh becomes a long conversation with mercy, where feet learn patience and back learns gratitude, and the imam's pauses feel like doors through which the heart walks slower and sees more. The Prophet reviewed the Quran with Jibreel every Ramadan and twice in his final year, establishing a rhythm that turns the month into a recitation festival, a time when even those far the rest of the year hear the call to come near, and many answer with tears they did not schedule. The gates of heaven are said to open, the gates of harm narrow, and devils are chained, reminding you that while whispers weaken, habits remain, and the work of unlearning cruelty, impatience, and waste must be carried by your willing hands. Suhoor before dawn is not only fuel, it is a secret meeting where intention is written freshly, and if you have ever eaten a single date in that quiet window, you know how little it takes to feel wealthy when gratitude is awake. Iftar is not a festival of excess. It is a ceremony of relief and thanks, a moment to keep the stomach modest so the spirit can remain light, a time to share as if your own hunger taught you how food tastes in another's mouth. The 10 nights that close the month carry a density of mercy that humbles arithmetic, and Laylat al-Qadr is introduced not as a night of fireworks, but as a night better than 1,000 months, where descending angels make the air a little different for those whose hearts are open. You ask forgiveness with a dua the Prophet taught, Allahumma innaka afuwun tuibul afwa fa'fu anni. And you keep asking because you are learning that God loves to forgive more than you love to be forgiven. Qiyam in those nights is not an athletic contest. It is a private audience where your ledger is softened by tears and your future is angled toward light by promises you intend to keep in the morning. What you practice in Ramadan is not meant to expire at Eid. It is meant to leak forward lighter mornings with Quran, leaner meals with more gratitude, calmer tempers trained by daily hunger, and charity scheduled like a bill because love pays its dues on time. Zakat al-Fitr carries the spirit of repair. You contribute so that no one stands at Eid in hunger or humiliation, and communal joy becomes a right, not a privilege reserved for the fortunate. Eid arrives as a graduation ceremony, where simple clothes shine brighter than luxury because they are ironed by sincerity, and hugs stitch back the small tears community life makes during the year. If you missed a target, pages unread, nights slept through, tempers lost, do not surrender the year to regret. Carry a small practice forward as a souvenir from the month, and let it remind you that God judges trajectories as much as snapshots. Ramadan also trains vision. You start noticing the invisible workers who make your life possible, the one who cleans the masjid, the cashier fasting behind the register, the parent who eats last, and gratitude expands from God to God's servants. The month cures 2 illnesses at once, despair by showing you your capacity to change, and pride by revealing how much help you needed to do it, and the cure lasts if you keep taking the medicine of remembrance after the month closes. Some nights will be dry, read anyway. Some fasts will be heavy, smile anyway. Some days will be crowded with work, snatch a verse anyway. The one who watches intention scales your smalls into mountains when your circumstances shrink your hours. And when the crescent for Shawwal is seen, remember that the Lord of Ramadan is the Lord of all months. Do not put away your tenderness like seasonal decorations. Keep 6 simple fasts in Shawwal if you can, for the promise feels like mercy upon mercy, turning a month into a year's worth of reward, and the momentum helps your habits survive the calendar's turn. Every return to Ramadan will find a new you, and the book will meet that new you with verses that felt familiar and now feel fated, as if they were waiting to be heard by this version of your life. The night better than 1,000 months is not a lottery you win by accident. It is a door for anyone who knocks with sincerity, and even if you do not feel fireworks, trust that angels know how to write what your tears asked for. By the end, you will understand that the month was not a marathon you finished, but a mirror you faced, and the face that learned to love hunger for God will learn to love obedience after hunger fades. Carry that face gently into ordinary days, and let the light you met at night make decisions in daylight, and by next Ramadan you will not be starting over, you will be continuing a friendship that never stopped. A companionship with the Quran is not a hobby you pick up when life is quiet. It is a relationship that chooses you back, shaping the hours you cannot control and healing the hours you can. It begins simply with a decision that feels too small to matter, 1 page before the world wakes, 1 verse on a crowded bus, 1 whispered repetition before sleep, and then slowly, that decision gathers habits the way a snowflake gathers a hillside. You read and the page reads you. You come with questions, and the verse answers the question underneath the question. The Quran is not impatient with beginners and not impressed by veterans. It welcomes both by asking for sincerity, consistency, and a heart willing to be corrected. Translations usher meaning toward you like kind interpreters, but the Arabic Quran is the exact miracle, the very speech that moved the tongue of the Prophet. So honor translations as bridges while you keep walking toward the original shore. Take a teacher, even if pride says you can manage alone. A mouth corrected is a heart protected, and there is a humility in letting someone shape your sounds that trains you to let God shape your choices. When energy is thin, listen with attention. When energy returns, recite with care. When comprehension opens, reflect with gratitude. When resolve arrives, obey with gentleness. Because companionship deepens when all your capacities take turns serving the same love. Some verses invite prostration, and your forehead learns what your mind could not explain, because understanding is sometimes kneeling before it is knowing. Some verses widen gratitude until yesterday's complaints look small and today's bread tastes like a miracle. Some verses carve out a space inside you where anger loses its throne and patience learns to sit comfortably. The Quran does not demand a dramatic personality change overnight. It teaches you to change your next sentence, your next decision, your next habit, and then lets time do what time does to seeds that are watered. If you stay long enough, you will discover the quiet science of companionship. Small, regular doses beat large, irregular feasts. Review keeps what zeal collects, and acting on a single teaching stabilizes 10 more. The book trains your calendar as much as your creed, a morning portion that clears the windshield of worry, an afternoon check-in that interrupts the momentum of heedlessness, an evening recitation that gathers the day back into purpose, and a before-sleep portion that hands your fears to a Lord who does not sleep. You will learn to pair recitation with small anchors always at the same table, after the same prayer, with a notebook and a pen, because the body loves ritual, and the heart thrives when the body's love is recruited for God. You will learn to protect your portion the way busy people protect appointments with powerful people, except the power here is mercy, and the appointment heals both what you know and what you haven't yet discovered is broken. On days you are bleeding time and attention, give at least 2 lines their rights and refuse the lie that only an hour counts, because the Quran multiplies sincerity, not minutes. On days you are full of strength, do not boast. Let the extra be a secret between you and the one who wrote the ease into your hour. Carry a small selection of verses as you would carry keys, Ayat al-Kursi for courage, the closing of al-Baqarah for surrender with dignity, the Mu'awwidhat for refuge from harms visible and whispered, the opening of al-Fatiha whenever you need a straight path, carved through a crooked day, and watch how those keys fit locks you did not know you would face this week. Long companionship also means learning to live with questions. Scholars differed, with mercy, about which verse came last, and the lesson of that difference is not confusion but humility, certainty where God and His messenger made things certain, and gentleness where the map has soft edges. You practice that gentleness by refusing to turn the book into a hammer for your ego, by letting law be love organized rather than control disguised, and by remembering that the Sunnah is the lens through which the page comes into sharp relief. Over years, the Quran will begin to organize your insides. It will teach your hope to grow roots so it survives winter. It will teach your fear to find its proper size so it stops bullying your decisions. It will teach your love to serve duty so romance stops wasting your worship. It will teach your grief that tears can irrigate gratitude rather than drown it. And it will teach your anger that dignity is a better weapon than volume. You will notice how language begins to change. Exaggeration drains from your speech. Backbiting tastes bitter, promises weigh more, and silence learns to work as a craftsman rather than as an escape artist. You will notice how choices simplify. Some doors close because they do not fit your prayers anymore. Some friendships deepen because truth has become a shared language, and some ambitions redirect because the book introduced you to a more generous definition of success. You will nearly forget to measure your worth by the speed of your promotions, and remember to measure it by the steadiness of your obedience. None of this is dramatic on a single Tuesday, but across a year your friends will say, "You are calmer," and your enemies will admit you are less corruptible. The Quran's companionship is not a performance, it is a patient renovation. The walls of ego get new windows of humility. The floors of habit get new planks of prayer. The roof of perspective stops leaking panic every time a storm arrives. And the front door, which used to open to every impulse that knocked loudly, begins to require identification. There will be seasons of dryness. You will sit with a page and feel like nothing enters. Do not conclude that love has died. Conclude that your Lord is training you to love Him even without constant fireworks. Continue with smaller bites. Protect the adab, cleanliness, presence, refuge-seeking, basmalah, and carry at least one instruction into the day so that obedience keeps the artery open when emotion is low. There will be seasons of flood. Meanings will arrive too fast for your pen. Pray that gratitude protects you from pride, and convert the overflow into service. Teach a child a verse. Send a reminder without performance. Increase your charity quietly, so the flood irrigates others rather than eroding your sincerity. There will be seasons of conflict when opinions roar and your timeline weaponizes verses. Make your Quranic companionship visible by restraint, verification, returning difficult questions to people of knowledge, and refusing to win debates at the cost of losing manners. There will be seasons of grief when words feel heavy in the mouth. Let listening carry you, let tears count as dhikr, and let a single "Our Lord have mercy" be your entire recitation for a night, because the one you are speaking to measures weight differently than people do. A lifelong companionship also includes letting the Quran manage your relationships. It trains how you love your parents, kind words, patience with their repetitions, warmth even when correction is needed, prayer for them in their absence, because honoring those who carried you is a way of honoring the one who carried them. It trains how you treat your spouse, mercy in private, justice in public, gratitude spoken before criticism, apology made quickly, boundaries kept with dignity, and how you raise children, stories over threats, routines over lectures, model over slogan, because family is often where character either proves itself or pretends. It trains how you meet the vulnerable, the orphan, the migrant, the prisoner, the neighbor who is unseen, so that your worship is not confined to carpets. Your street becomes part of your prayer mat. It trains how you disagree, no mockery, no suspicion unfounded, no backbiting disguised as concern, truth spoken better than the insult you received, and a readiness to reconcile when principle permits, because the page refuses to let your ego rename cruelty as courage. It trains your money to worship lawful earning, prompt payment, written agreements, avoidance of interest, generosity that follows plan, not mood, so that your ledger on earth becomes light in your ledger in heaven. The book reaches into your calendar and blocks time for service, into your wardrobe and teaches modesty that honors rather than hides, and into your diet and asks for restraint, into your leisure and asks that rest, renew rather than rot, until you realize there is no square left outside its map, and that is exactly the freedom you were seeking. Along the way, you will meet the voices that try to pull you off, companionship voices of haste that say rules are cages, voices of despair that say you are too stained to continue, voices of boredom that say repetition is emptiness, voices of arrogance that say you can skip community and teachers. Answer haste with experience. Every time you have obeyed, peace followed, and every time you've ignored, regret followed. Answer despair with doctrine. The door of return is open until your final breath, and the one who loves to forgive did not retire because you fell again. Answer boredom with attention. Repetition is the loom that turns single fibers into fabric, and no athlete, artist, or saint became excellent by novelty alone. Answer arrogance with history. The greatest people of this ummah took teachers even when angels visited their homes, and you are not safer alone than they were together. Keep friends who read, elders who correct, youth who ask, and scholars who say, I do not know, and your companionship will find shade in a forest rather than try to survive in a desert. Let the Quran be present at transitions, because transitions tell the truth about what you love. Before a new job, read a page and ask to be a source of fairness in that building. Before marriage, read a page and ask to be a garment of mercy for the other. When a child arrives, read a page and ask to be a gardener of their fitra rather than a sculptor of your ego. When death visits a home, read a page and ask for patience that honors the deceased with acts they would have loved to see. When money grows, read a page and ask for generosity that scales with blessing. When reputation grows, read a page and ask to remain invisible to pride. When health fails, read a page and ask for a tongue that praises in hospitals as easily as it praised in gardens. In every hallway between rooms of life, the book stabilizes your steps with verses that have seen millions of feet and never wear out. Keep a record of how the Quran has loved you. The day a verse stopped you from replying with cruelty. The night a surah kept you from despair. The week a single command cohered your scattered tasks. The month a new routine sealed a leak in your character. The year a teacher's correction saved your recitation from fossilizing into error. Write these mercies not for applause but for memory, because forgetfulness is the soil where ingratitude grows, and gratitude is the water that keeps companionship flowering. Pass these stories forward to children and friends the way elders pass heirlooms. This verse carried me through a winter, you will say, and someone listening will borrow that blanket when their season turns cold. One day your voice will tremble with age, and the Quran will sound like youth inside an older body. Words memorized when bones were light will comfort when joints are heavy. A short surah recited on a hospital bed will feel larger than palaces. People will visit and ask how you stayed gentle, and you will point to the mushaf by your side as if to say, my manners are borrowed. If you are granted grandchildren, let them see your lips moving even when hearing has dimmed. Love of the book is more contagious than illness and more hereditary than eye color. If you are granted solitude, it will not be emptiness. Angels love the rooms where Quran is read, and solitude will feel like a well-tended garden where the gardener still walks in the cool of the day. And when the final hours approach, let the verses you carried carry you, and let the promise, read and rise, be the echo that steadies the bridge between worlds. In the end, you will discover that you never truly held fast to the Quran, it held fast to you. Every time you walked away, it tugged at your sleeve through a line you remembered or a friend who called. Every time you hardened, it found a crack and poured meaning through until the stone softened. Every time you boasted, it quietly reminded you of who forgives, who provides, who protects, who elevates. It carried you across nights that would have drowned you and through mornings that would have scattered you, and it kept your hands clean enough to keep building after storms had passed. Keep going. Keep a portion. Keep a teacher. Keep a notebook. Keep a promise with the one who spoke and still speaks through his book. And know, with a knowledge that sits low and warm in the chest, that if you read a little, ponder a little, practice a little, and return whenever you wander, the Quran will never tire of being your companion, because it was sent not to visit lives, but to remake them into the shape of light.